Our project today is going to be how to do a front brake job on an E46. Now to do this project, here's what's going to happen. We got to take the rotor locator bolt off. We're going to have to, and I recommend doing that first because you'll need somebody to hold the brake for you. So you'll need the caliper on for that phase of the project. Then what we need to do is the caliper will need to be removed. This is a floating caliper. So you're going to have the floating caliper portion that has the piston in it. That'll be the actual caliper. And then there'll be the caliper bracket. On the back side here, you've got two Allen head bolts. Those are the sliding pins that you're going to take those sliding pins out. That'll require a 7mm socket, Allen socket, with a short extension. And what we're going to do is take that. You're going to take both of these pins out. The next part of the removal is going to be to remove the anti-rattle clip. That separates the bracket and the caliper. Now we have to depress it slightly in because there's two barbed hooks right in here that hook on to the caliper holes right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to push it down, remove them by pressing them in and out, and there you go. Before you pull the caliper out, what you're going to want to do is get a bungee cord. What I like to do is hang them around one of the coils on the springs, get it ready, because what we're going to do now is remove the caliper, but to keep from putting any stress on the brake line or the wire to the brake pad sensor, what I like to do is hang my calipers up while I'm working on the rest of the vehicle. I'm going to remove the grommet that holds the pad sensor wire, pull the caliper straight out. There you go. And what I'm going to do is hang this thing by the holes. And there we go. Now we can work on taking the bracket for the caliper off and removing the rotor, replacing the rotor. Okay, here we are on the back side of the caliper. Here's the bracket still on the vehicle. Here's the caliper over to one side. I've hung it to one side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a 16mm socket and I'm going to remove the bracket from the vehicle. I need to remove the bracket so I can get the rotors off. Okay. Now what we're going to do with the bracket, we're going to clean it up real well because in this area right here is where the floating portion of the caliper slides across. So we're going to put a little anti-seize on that, but before we do, we're going to clean this up real well. Earlier we already loosened the rotor locator bolt. So now at this point what you want to do is just remove it. Now if for any reason you've damaged the locator bolt, we have another video that shows you how to remove them once they have been damaged. Next phase is you want to make sure that this surface is absolutely spotless. Now we've already cleaned this a little bit. You want to put a little bit of anti-seize on this area here because this is how the rotor gets frozen onto the hub itself. What we do typically is you'll use a little sandpaper on it. You'll clean the rust off of this area. It'll also help it later on for putting your wheels on because this wheel centers up on this outer surface. The rotor centers up on this inner surface. So what we're going to do is clean that real well so our new rotor will slip right on. Now what we're going to do is put a little bit of anti-seize on this surface right here. It does not take a whole lot. All we're trying to do is to keep new rust from forming when we put our new rotors on. Here we have our new rotor. We're using Ate Premium 1 rotors. I'm going to do a preliminary lineup of my rotator hole here where the bolt goes. That's lined up. I've got my new bolt on the end of my socket there, and there we go. Now avoid touching the rotor. You don't want to introduce a bunch of new grease to the rotor. If you do get a little on there, make sure you got all the grease off of the rotor. You don't want to introduce those to your new brake pads. So the next step we're going to do is put on the caliper bracket, and then we're going to reinstall the caliper. Now we've cleaned up the carrier, and what we're doing right now is we're going to bolt it to the spindle. Now these bolts need to be torqued to 81 foot-pounds. Now you're going to take your torque wrench with your 16mm socket. Now when you use a torque wrench, you don't want to jerk the torque wrench. You want to just pull it and let it put your poundage, and you'll hear it click in a moment. I'm going to go to the other side, get some even torque on both pieces, both sides. There we go. There you go. Then I always double check just to make sure. Now the next step, we're going to add the little anti-seize, the little friction surfaces here. You don't want to get any on the rotors. And the next step, we'll put in the pads and the caliper. Now on the fender well, inside of the fender well, there's a small little trap door here that has two sensors in it. One's going to be the brake pad sensor for the left front. The other one's a speed sensor. What we're going to do here is you're going to take the unit, the connector, out of the housing. Then what you're going to do is pull the unit apart like this, and the part that you're going to discard will be the sensor that goes into the pad. The next step, we got to push the piston back in the caliper, because obviously when we put two pads in here that are thicker than the originals we took out, the worn ones, we're going to obviously need to make more room. So what we're going to do now is we're going to push this piston back all the way to the back seat. Give us enough room to put the pads over the rotors, just like that. And I've back seated them all the way. Now, to avoid squeaks, what I typically do is I take a anti-squeak compound like this. It's basically a glue product, and what it's going to do is go all over the back of the pad right here. And what we're doing is essentially we've got a high temperature adhesive that is a flexible adhesive that's going to somewhat glue the pad to the piston of the caliper and to the backside of the caliper, and it'll keep any vibrations from happening. Because what squeaks are is vibrations. It's the pad vibrating on the rotor at a real high rate of speed. Now, one of your pads has no clip on it. That one goes on the outside. You can already pre-assemble that one. Then you've got the second pad that has a clip assembly here that goes inside of the piston of the caliper. So what I'm going to do is take that and put it in position at this time. What I'm going to do is put it right over the hole in the piston, and you'll just push that in. Now it's in position. I'm going to take my bungee cord off. Then what I'm going to do is put that over the other pad. Now I've got everything in position. The next part's going to be putting in our slider pins. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the guide pins. Now I've already cleaned them off pretty well. We're going to put a little bit of anti-seize on it, just so they slide, especially in areas where you've got a lot of weather. Up in New York, where you get a lot of snow and things like that, you want to have this stuff sliding very well, stay lubricated, because the caliper has to freely move back and forth. If it gets stuck in the forward position, it's going to apply pressure to the pad and wear out the pad prematurely. So what you're going to do now is you're going to put this into the little guide hole. You got to kind of find the location. Okay, I've got it started. Okay, there's the torque. There we go. Now we're going to put on our anti-chatter clips here. Now on these brake pad sensors, you want to be a little careful with them. They're plastic or porcelain, and what kind of happens here is you want to get this groove over your brake pad backing plate. Then you've got the little clips here that'll find their own way home. This is the part right here that goes against the pad surface. This would hit, basically, that right there would hit the rotor first. So I found the groove right there. What I'm going to do is gently push down in the middle of it here to just get it to snap in. There's the clip.